So the latest installment in my favorite series of all time, Star Wars, has finally come to a close, and that is the first season of Andor, and I have plenty of thoughts about it. Let's get into this. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about season 1 of Andor. With directorial duties going to people like Toby Haynes, Benjamin Caron, and Susanna White, this film stars people like Diego Luna, Stellan Skarsgård, Genevieve O'Reilly, Kyle Soller, and many others, and is the prequel series to Rogue One, the prequel to the original Star Wars A New Hope. Hey guys, what's going on? Before we get too far into this, I just want to say a big thanks to you for clicking here on this video, whether you're a returning viewer or a new viewer. I definitely like to welcome you to hit that like button because it definitely helps the channel out, and get your fingers ready to start typing down below, letting me know what you thought about the series Andor, or at least the first season. I also want to mention really quickly, like I mentioned in my last video that I did for the menu, that I've been having issues with my mic, unfortunately, not working with my camera. So today, again, I will not be filming with a microphone that typically has better audio, so I do apologize if there's any echo from the room or anything like that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into my thoughts on this first season. Before I also get really into it, I do also want to mention that I'm going to do just a general thoughts kind of thing here at the start, talking about the characters and the base setup of the individual characters and the actors that are here in the show. And then in the latter half of this video, I'll give a spoiler warning and I'll get into some of the bit of the details that I want to get into. I do want to say though, this isn't going to be a breakdown of every single event that happens in every episode, just more me sitting down and rambling about the things that I liked and didn't like about the show. But I'm happy to say I honestly loved this series and I have plenty of thoughts on it. And one thing I also want to mention that is going to go into my thoughts here is that unlike a lot of other shows that maybe have a season, and depending on how successful that season is with the fans and critics and just overall viewership, you know, they'll end up announcing that the season was renewed or the show was renewed for another season or stuff like that, as most shows tend to work. But in the case of Andor, thankfully, we already know that it's going to be a 2-season show. They had that planned, and at Star Wars Celebration earlier this year, they did announce that it's going to be 24 episodes altogether, 12 episodes a season. So with that said, I'm taking that into consideration here in my opinion of the overall season for anything that I felt maybe was a little bit underdeveloped or things that I felt could have been expanded upon a lot more, because there are a lot of elements about this show that are clearly meant to roll over into season 2, so that this show is something that people eventually years from now will be able to sit down and watch completely in 2 seasons and have those answers laid out for them. So for anything that I felt was a little bit unanswered or that I think they didn't really dive too deep into, I think that there's a lot more to come. It was clear there was a lot of things set up for season 2, so I am taking that into consideration in my review. So let's talk about the title character here, Cassian Andor, played by Diego Luna. I really enjoyed him in Rogue One when we first were introduced to him. I thought that he was a fantastic addition to that movie. I really enjoyed the seriousness of his character, and more than anything, he really, for me, symbolized an individual who was willing to do anything for the rebellion. You know, when you watch the original trilogy and, you know, even the prequel movies, even things like the Clone Wars, even though the films have dived deep into the fact that there are people who are bad on both sides, we haven't really had too much of that really focused on, or us focusing on a character who actually does that. So in the case of Cassian Andor, you have this person who is driven to work with the rebellion and is driven to work to do what he needs to do to bring the Empire down. But in a lot of ways, he's no better than some of the Imperial individuals, in the sense that he is willing to kill people to get information and to do things in order to bring the Empire down. And this show really dives deeper into why that is. I think without a doubt, one of the things most people were really excited to see about this show was mainly just to see how Cassian kind of came to be that individual, specifically with that line he gives Jyn Erso in Rogue One.
What do you know? We don't all have the luxury of deciding when and where we want to care about something. Suddenly the rebellion is real for you. Some of us live it. I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old. You're not the only one who lost everything. Some of us just decided to do something about it.
But if I'm completely honest, going into the show, this was probably the Star Wars series or movie that they had announced that I was probably the least excited for. Not to say that I thought it was going to be bad or anything like that. I've enjoyed most of what Lucasfilm has put out since the Disney acquisition. I've been a big fan of everything. You know, I've had my gripes with certain things, but between the movies, the books, the comics, the video games, the live action stuff, the animated stuff, there's been so much Star Wars content that I'm consistently taking in that if one story or certain elements of certain stories didn't work for me 100%, I never really lost my shit like some fans, because there was so much more that I was consuming that was really, really strong across all the various media that they do release Star Wars content on. And so going into the show, I kind of went in just with an open mind, but I didn't really know what I was going to feel from it. The trailers looked cool, but I wasn't blown away by it. But going into the show, I'm so happy to say that I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with this first season. I found it to be a very well-written, grounded, serious take on Star Wars that isn't really interested in being the bam, ba, 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 the Jedi are here, ba, 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 the Force, which I love that stuff. I love the pulpy sci-fi stuff that Star Wars has always been about. Of course, George Lucas was highly influenced by things like Flash Gordon back in the day, and of course the Seven Samurai, and he was just a big fan of very pulpy sci-fi. So that's very much at the forefront of all the stuff that George Lucas would always do in terms of Star Wars. But here now we have this show that isn't really interested in that and is far more going for something that is grounded, serious, and is trying to be more of a political thriller. And that's something I definitely have to give kudos to the main writer and showrunner of the show, Tony Gilroy. He pretty much told the cast and everybody involved in the show that, you know, when you're making the show, when you're acting these lines out, don't really think about the fact that you're in Star Wars. Try to detach from that and far more just try to make something that feels grounded and realistic and gritty. Of course, it is in Star Wars. There's droids, there's robots, there's blasters, there's space battles, there's ships, there's stormtroopers walking around. So this is 110% Star Wars, but their goal was to make this feel like something that could exist in real life in terms of its story. And I think for the most part, they really succeeded in that. This is a story that really leans into the oppression of the Empire and how they've just been a maniacal force, you know. And I think that things like the original trilogy or Star Wars Rebels has definitely leaned heavily into that. You know, we've definitely seen the dark side. We have in this series before, we've definitely seen the oppression of the Sith and the oppression of the Empire. But I think more so this show and things like Rogue One showed us just individual people, boots on the ground people that really at their core had to kind of learn to kind of live in this world that is just filled with oppression. You know, there are those Jedi characters and those hero characters and those hero stories, but there are the everyday people that just have to struggle with life that live in this universe. And I think that this show and Rogue One have handled that really, really well, just showing us the everyday oppression of just an everyday person trying to live their life in the Star Wars universe. You definitely feel the oppression of the Empire here. I really thought they handled that very well in this show. And I think bringing back Diego Luna as Cassian Andor, phenomenal. I loved him in the role, and I've only grown to love his character more and more with every revisit of Rogue One, and now with this show. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what they do with him in season 2, and I really enjoyed seeing his journey here as he really went from somebody who was out for himself for the longest time, and then eventually had to realize that the Empire is gonna come for him just as much as everybody else, even if he thinks that the Empire isn't looking for him. And I definitely want to touch on some other actors here and some things here. I don't want to take up all your time in the day, but definitely somebody I want to talk about is Stellan Skarsgård as Luthen Rael. He's an individual that we meet early on in the show who, I won't get too deep into the spoilers with everything around him, but essentially he's living a double life. Back on Coruscant, he wears a wig, and he is this guy who has a den of antiquities, if you will, where he's essentially a collector of various artifacts and different things like that, where people can come and purchase different things, which was great to see. I love seeing his place that he was filled in or that he worked at, because he had all these little artifacts and Easter eggs and things like that the art department was able to just kind of fill with a bunch of Easter eggs and little hints and nods to the movies, to books, to comics, to video games, references to characters that are canon, some that are not canon. And it was really, really great to see, whether it's the Gungans, the Wookiees, things that Padme wore on her head, or things like Star Killer from the video games The Force Unleashed. I really enjoyed seeing all the little Easter eggs and things like that in the back of his little den of antiquities. And I really enjoy the double life that he plays here, because you have Luthen being this guy who is really trying to make the rebellion a thing. He's this guy who has sacrificed everything and has essentially lost any sort of empathy within himself to make the rebellion a thing, which again, I think this is what this show really highlights, is that there are so many individuals in the universe of Star Wars that are just so oppressed by the Empire that they don't care anymore. They're not really caring about being the good guy, you know? They're not trying to be Luke Skywalker, the Jedi who comes and takes down the Empire and the Force, the light side of the Force. This show wasn't really interested in focusing on that, and instead showing how there are people who have to sacrifice their own humanity in order to make the rebellion a thing. In order to fight this tyranny, they had to, become part of what that tyranny is. And I think Luthen was the perfect example of that, as he lives this double life and he's part of building this rebellion. And I really thought that Stellan Skarsgård gave a fantastic performance in this show, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with him as well in season 2. Then we got to talk about Genevieve O'Reilly, who plays Mon Mothma in this and also played Mon Mothma in Rogue One. But most notably for me, what's amazing is that she was originally cast to play Mon Mothma in the prequel films for Revenge of the Sith, in what is deleted scenes that are no longer in that film. So any longtime Star Wars fan who's familiar with behind the scenes stuff and deleted scenes knows that she has some tenure with the franchise. However, one of the things that was interesting to me is that they deleted those scenes, and years later, nearly 15 years later, she would end up getting a phone call to come back and play the character in Rogue One. And then the character would go on to be expanded upon far more in things like Star Wars Rebels, and now we get to see her here. And this is the most screen time that her character has had. She is one of the biggest supporting characters in the show, and I thought that Genevieve O'Reilly gave the performance so much. I really enjoyed her performance here. I really found myself invested in the Mon Mothma element of this story, and seeing this individual who has, again, this dream for the rebellion, but unlike Luthen, she isn't necessarily 100% ready to lose her humanity. She almost has a naivety about how she is going to approach this rebellion. She almost feels like she can get away with building this rebellion without having to do the dark and dirty deeds that need to happen in order for this rebellion to succeed. And it's really great to see the separation and the difference between somebody like her and Luthen, who both have the same goals, but they have completely different ways of achieving those goals. And so, yeah, I thought that her character was a really compelling character throughout the course of the show, as we see her slowly have to kind of lose her heart over the course of the series, realizing that she's gonna have to start making some compromises to her integrity in order for her to actually make this rebellion a reality. Then we have Kyle Soller as Cyril Karn, who I really enjoyed his character. I do wish they did a little bit more with his character, but it seems like based on this first season, they have a lot more planned for him in season 2 than they did with season 1. But I did enjoy his performance here. I did enjoy the character. He's somebody who's going after Cassian Andor after Cassian actually killed somebody in the first episode that's part of a local security on a certain planet, and Cyril has now been fired after he just went balls to the wall trying to find Cassian, and he blames Cassian for the fact that he's lost his job, and he feels like nobody really took it as seriously as he did. So he tries to connect himself with the Empire, and he tries to do everything he can to locate Cassian Andor, and he does have this vendetta against him. I do wish they did more with his character over the course of the season. I do feel like at a certain point he was sidelined, but again, I am taking into consideration with all the character development they gave him in this season, that moving into season 2, it really does seem that they're going to have a lot more to do with his character. So I am keeping in mind that this is meant to be viewed as a 2-season show. Then you have the actress Denise Gao, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce her name, but she plays the character of Dedra Meero, and I really enjoyed her here. I think she's one of the most intimidating Imperial characters we've ever had in a movie or TV show. And let's be honest, the Imperials a lot of times have been made to be a joke. Of course, they lean into how serious the Empire is in plenty of Star Wars media, but there's always the jokes of the different people who get choked out by Darth Vader because they're incompetent, or the stormtroopers not being able to shoot somebody because they have bad aim. But this show really does hone in on some Imperial characters that are far more intimidating, that are more low tier than Darth Vader or Grand Admiral Thrawn, but at the core of it really have the same goals and same drive. And I thought the character of Dedra Meero here was really great. I thought they were really compelling, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what they do with her in the next season, because without a doubt she was my favorite part of the show on the villain side of things. Then we definitely have to talk about Fiona Shaw, who plays Marva Andor, who is the mother to Andor, but is more of an adoptive mother. Early in the season we learned that Cassian Andor was from a planet called Canary, and that he was actually saved by a woman named Marva. And so he ends up being the adopted son of her. And over the course of the season, one thing that they never really tied up is that Cassian is looking for a sister, which I do believe is going to roll into season 2. And so, yeah, we do learn that Cassian is from this tribe. As a child, he was known as Casa. That's what his sister calls him as a young boy. And the Empire ends up coming through, or the Separatists, based on the logo that we see. And things end up getting really nasty. And that's when Marva comes in and ends up saving Cassian from this situation. But yeah, I really enjoyed the character of Marva Andor. There are things that I wish they would have done more, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the spoiler section of this video. But overall, I did enjoy her performance here. I thought she brought a lot to the table, and there's definitely some impactful moments with the character of Marva. And then a character I definitely want to mention here that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in the spoiler section here is the character of Kino Loy, played by Andy Serkis, returning to Star Wars after his performance as Supreme Leader Snoke in the sequel trilogy. And yeah, I really enjoyed him here. I think he gives a phenomenal performance. He is so good, and every time I see Andy Serkis in anything, I'm just absolutely mind blown. Like, the dude is just a top tier actor from beginning to end. There's not a single moment in anything that I've ever watched him in where I think, oh, this guy isn't really good at acting. I am always captivated by Andy Serkis as an actor, and this movie, or this show, is no different. And then I definitely want to take a moment to just praise the composer, Nicholas Britell, who's done things like She Said, Don't Look Up, Cruella, Moonlight, The Big Short, to just name a few. And I really enjoyed his score here. I thought it really elevated the material and gave us a lot of really impactful emotional moments. Overall, Andor was a fantastic show. I don't want to get too deep into the story and things like that, because I do keep in mind that with these reviews, a lot of you probably haven't seen the show, and so maybe you're just wanting to hear my thoughts on the show overall. I'm happy to say I thought it was great. I think if you're a fan of Star Wars, there's a lot to be enjoyed here. I know that some people saw the first couple episodes, or even just the first episode, and thought the show was a little bit slow, and I will say this is not a show that's really about action. There is action, but it's not about the action. It's far more about the dialogue. This is far more about a boots on the ground story that's far more about the oppression of the Empire and how it affects everybody, even if those people think that they are clear from the Empire. Even if they think, you know what, I'm not doing anything bad, I'll be just fine. This show really highlights how even the most innocent people can end up getting wrapped up in the Empire's games and end up being just as oppressed as the people who are committing crimes or war crimes or whatever the case may be. I think this show really does a great job of showing the evil of the Empire and really expands upon it with great dialogue, great performances, and a much slower tone. There are times in the show, without a doubt, that I found the show to be a little slower than I would have liked it to be, and I do think that with the 12 episodes, there were plenty of moments where I felt, hey, maybe we could have crammed this into a few less episodes, but I did really enjoy my time watching it overall. I never found myself bored or out of it or falling asleep while watching it or anything like that. I think it will depend on the individual, but I do want to keep in mind for people that moving into watching this show, if you only watch like the first episode, got to keep in mind that they dropped the first 3 episodes when the first episodes dropped on purpose, because those first 3 episodes I really feel set up the show and the story. In a lot of ways, I almost feel like I wish they would have had less episodes but longer episodes, make it more like individual movies that were episodes versus it being the hour-long episodes, because I feel like they maybe would have flowed a little bit better that way. But overall, I really enjoyed the show, and I definitely recommend it for anybody who has not gotten around to it yet. I think if you're a fan of Star Wars, or if you just want to see something different from Star Wars, I think this is definitely something that will be right up your alley. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get into my spoilers right now. So that is your spoiler warning. If you have not seen the series, get the fuck out of here. Let's get into my thoughts on Andor spoilers. So the first section of the show actually focuses on the fact that Cassian is meeting Luthen. He was trying to buy something from Luthen that ended up being an Imperial thing, that ended up getting the ISB, the Imperial Security Bureau, coming after Cassian, or trying to look for who he was and trying to see who he was involved with. And meanwhile, through all of this, he's working with a group of individuals who are going to a place called Aldhani, and they're going to try to do a huge heist on this Imperial base. And they end up pulling it off, and it ends up causing a big disruption in the Imperial world, and Cassian thinks he's kind of gotten away scot-free. But unfortunately, as time goes on, he ends up kind of accidentally getting arrested and going to prison. And this is where I feel like the biggest spoiler things of the show really come into play, as he goes to Narkina 5 and is put into this crazy prison with electric floors. And I just really enjoyed all of this. I found it to be a really good time, really invested in all of that time. And this specifically is where we meet Kino Loy, played by Andy Serkis. And yeah, this was a whole fantastic section of the show. The entire prison element of the show, seeing the oppression of the Empire, seeing how you have have all these individuals who think they're going to get out of this prison and learn that the Empire is just moving people from one prison to the next. You think you're getting out, but you're actually not. And so all these people are working hard, trying to, be good little boys and good little girls working under the Empire, but ultimately learn that all of their work was for naught, and that by the time that they try to get out of here, they're just going to be moved to a different prison or moved to a different section of the prison to be part of the slave labor of the Empire. And so eventually this all leads to this huge prison break, which I thought was fantastic, and we get this amazing speech from Kino Loy, played by Andy Serkis. Overall, I thought that he was fantastic in the season, and it was heartbreaking when we get to the end of his prison break and learn that he can't swim because this prison is in the middle of the ocean. And for me, this was symbolic of the fact that later on, Andor is going to give his life doing this huge thing for the rebellion, obviously getting the Death Star plans out there that will eventually lead to the destruction of the Death Star and be one of the most pivotal moments in bringing the Empire down. But yeah, I thought this was fantastic. A great way to symbolize how you have this individual who started this uprising and gave everybody this inspiration to go out there and try to destroy the Empire. And this ultimately leads to his death. He ultimately can't escape with everybody else because he can't swim. And it's such a heartbreaking moment. I think that Andy Serkis played it so well. And yeah, I thought that was really great symbolism for where we would see Cassian Andor just a few years later. Then something I enjoyed about this show too is that we have a little droid in the show called B2, which I'm 97% sure at this point is going to be eventually put into a K2 unit and is going to become K2SO that we will eventually see later on in Rogue One. We do see some K2 units throughout the course of the show in one episode, and I thought that they were maybe going to do something with that then, but they don't. And so yeah, it's very clear that B2, this little astromech droid, I believe is an astromech droid, that can speak unlike a lot of the other droids. I do believe it's going to end up becoming K2 later on in the second season. So I am really looking forward to that, and I really enjoyed the camaraderie between him and Cassian, and specifically Marva, Cassian's mother, who does pass away in the show. We learn early on in the show that she's starting to get a little bit old and starting to feel a little bit sick and frail over the course of the episodes. But eventually, one of the episodes, she ends up dying off screen in between the episodes, and it's kind of used as this inspiration for the people of Ferrix as well as an inspiration for Cassian. And it's this really sad moment because I really liked her character and I wanted to see a lot more of her character, but we ultimately end up, I feel in my opinion, getting robbed of her a little bit. She was utilized beautifully in my opinion to really hone into the idea of this inspirational individual who pushes people to go out there and fight the Empire, but I do feel like they underutilized her just a little bit in certain moments, and I would have liked to have seen more. However, I will say in this final episode of the season, being able to see that hologram of her that gives that inspirational speech that leads to the people of Ferrix fighting the Empire, I thought was fantastic, and I really thoroughly enjoyed all the time spent with Marva, and I really wish that we would have had more time with her and Cassian, to be honest, but I think that only leans a little bit more into the tragedy of her loss. Over the course of the show, when it comes to Mon Mothma, we learn that she has kind of separated herself from the Chandrillin customs, which is where she's from. And in that custom, you end up marrying in your teens because it's kind of like an arranged marriage kind of thing. And her husband and her daughter are completely disconnected from her over the course of the show. We see this woman who has a daughter she's trying to love on, who doesn't care to have anything to do with her, and is kind of annoyed by her mother. Feels like her mother is just out there to just kind of get clout, but in the end of the day, doesn't know that her mother is trying to build this rebellion to bring down the Empire. And then her husband is just kind of this cocky dude who likes the various things that come from being the husband of a popular senator, the money, the life of gambling and the life of drinking and parties and different things like that. And that was definitely something that was really heartbreaking to see. I think Genevieve O'Reilly played that super well. But part of the whole thing I was mentioning earlier with her character about her having to learn to kind of lose a part of who she is and her humanity in order to achieve her goals, is eventually giving in to the fact that she is going to have to subject her daughter to these Chandrillin customs. And so in this final episode, we do see that she has given into that, and that is in order for her to eventually get the funds in order for her to continue funding the rebellion. So yeah, I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of end her character arc here, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with her moving forward, as she is losing that part of her humanity that was keeping her from being fully invested in the rebellion. And one thing I definitely wanted to touch on here for sure is Saw Gerrera being in the show. We get Forrest Whitaker coming back to play the character once again, reprising the role from Rogue One. We've also seen him reprise the role in things like Star Wars Rebels, as well as things like Jedi Fallen Order from just a couple of years ago. And the character obviously originally comes from the Clone Wars and has made appearances in things like the Bad Batch as well. But it was great to see him here as well. Definitely touching on a lot of the darker side of the origins of the rebellion, though he's not a huge part of the actual narrative here. And then the show ends with Luthen and Cassian Andor, as Cassian's like, hey, listen, I know you came here to kill me because I know who you are and you feel like I'm a threat to the rebellion and your whole situation. So go ahead and kill me now, or kind of bring me along with you so I could be a part of this whole thing. And then you got this great moment where Stellan Skarsgård as Luthen gives him a smile, and the show ends. And then we get a post-credit scene showing the Death Star being built, which of course we knew was going to happen here. And yeah, the show is over. There's plenty more. Like I said, this isn't a breakdown of absolutely everything. There are a lot of other characters and little things in the mix that I thought were good, but maybe aren't worth mentioning here in the video. I know that you guys only have limited time to see her sit. I know you guys only have limited time to sit here and watch me ramble about anything. So I appreciate anybody who's gotten this far into the video. But yeah, overall, I enjoyed the show. If you have any other spoiler things you want to talk about, we can talk about that down below in the comments. And just overall, I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about the show. Did you like the show? Did you not like the show? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? Yeah, you know, overall, there are elements about it that were a little slow at times and some things that I think could have been condensed, but I thought the performances, the practical effects, the locations, the set design, the costume design, the visuals of the show, everything about the show on a technical level I thought was top tier, and it's definitely one of the best looking Star Wars things that we've received in recent years. With that said, a big thanks to you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.